Hello, listener. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about ecological activism and ecological ideas. Now, if you know me, if you follow my channel, you know that I like to talk a little bit about ecological activism because I actually got started into politics as an ecological activist. Of course from the left, because how else, when I was younger. And over time you start, of course, if you're a serious thinker, you start looking away from these sort of egalitarian ideas and these sort of standard dogmas of the ecological movement, and you start looking more deeply. And then you find, for example, Kaczynski, and you find Pentilincula. So I'm going to discuss a little bit. I'm not going to present their ideas, but I'm going to formulate some critiques I have of particularly Kaczynski using some of Lincula's ideas. So first I'll give a little bit my perspective on ecology. So first, all ecological movements today are inherently maintainers of the status quo. They are conservative in the most orthodox definition of the word conservative. Because ecological movements today seek to preserve nature in the state that is familiar to humans, to keep nature as it has existed throughout human history. This actually runs completely contrary to what evolution is. There is no stasis in physics or nature. There is motion, there is eugenics or dysgenics, evolution, devolution. Now these terms like eugenics are human terms that apply a human value judgment. But it is nonetheless the case that there is no permanence as such in the living world. Things die, they change, they mutate, they disappear, they develop from existing things. The fauna of 100,000 years ago was completely different from what it is today. We've extinguished all megafauna, the mammoths, the giant kangaroos and sloths, giant beavers, we've killed them all. The fauna was very different, the flora was more similar to today. But if you go back 200 million years, both were completely unrecognizable. The forests were made of ferns, the dominant life species were gigantic insects and lizards. And if you go even further back, you go to 2 trillion years ago, the very biosphere of the Earth was not even predominantly made up of DNA. RNA was the dominant life form. And life was much less complex. Point being, life is changeable, life is mutating. Humanity is just an iteration of life, just a particular form of DNA. And you cannot maintain stasis in what species exist and what plants exist. Then all ecological movements are also inherently humanist, because their perspective is that of humanity, and even more frequently, their perspective is that of the human individual. Ecological movements are often very concerned about how changes to the environment will affect the individual quality of life of people, how pollution destroys the pleasant forests they walk in, how it will affect the diversity of their diet, be that the diversity of plants and animals they can eat, and the quality of the air they breathe, these sorts of things. Very direct, human, and in my opinion, petty concerns. Now, in my view of environmentalism, the question is not how to preserve an Earth recognizable to humans today, because Earth has changed many times. Things have come and gone. The primary question of environmental policy to me is, does a given policy, does an ideology, does a tendency, an economic trend, does this endanger the continued existence of life? And not life as we know it, the specific animals and plants, but life, anima, the spark of life. Secondary to that comes the question, does a policy negatively affect the continued existence of humans? And does it detrimentally affect our ability to reproduce and maximize our potential? And somewhere very far down the line comes the question of whether it affects our comfort and quality of life. But the reason I put human there and the continued existence of humans, because I am human. And as such I still have human concerns if you go from the macro to the micro level. I also, however, do not seek to maintain humanity as it is. I am not trying to maintain a stasis for humanity, since that is also impossible. A good book on this is J.F. Gariepi's book, The Revolutionary Phenotype, that goes into more detail about these evolutionary processes But it also explains that the very assumption that DNA, which is today the building block of all advanced multicellular life, it is not a given that it will forever be DNA that is the building block of life. That the very fundamental basis of what we consider life today could very well change in future. This is called the revolutionary phenotype. My view is that we need to use policies to advance and steer humanity into a positive course rather than the course that we are going today, which I would say is dysgenic. Now, of course, a policy like this, a term like dysgenic, is like all criteria imposed by humans on each other. It is to an extent subjective. Now, if you want to have some form of an objective measure, I would say the best objective measure to use is to say whether certain adaptations, policies, etc., economic trends, are improving our survivability as a species. Are they improving our fitness in our environment? Are they improving our environment to suit us better? Are they a positive to us as a species? And are they aiding us to maximize our potential? Now, that's my perspective. I'll analyze Ted Kaczynski. So to give the very basic premise of Ted Kaczynski is basically he says technology is inherently bad because human happiness and human freedom cannot coexist with technology, because technology estranges us from nature and we are a product of and evolved to function with nature. He said that historical trends, technological trends once set in motion, are very hard or impossible to alter, and they can only really be destroyed. Collapsing of society such as the fall of Rome or the Bronze Age collapse. He says it has to be a revolution, there can be no reform. His ultimate goal is the destruction of technological society, advanced industrial society, mass production, automatization principles, AI, computing, these sorts of things. The examples he uses of such trends are industrialization itself, increasing pollution. He says these things are pretty much bad because they negatively impact the mental state of people. It depresses them, it takes away their freedom, it takes away their ability to have ambitions and goals autonomously, because in a society your goals will be set by the trends around you. He uses terms such as over-socialization, where your concerns start to be dominated simply by the social pressure of others rather than your actual inherent thinking and desires. And so autonomy and ambition are curtailed by society. Happiness is made difficult. And for example, technology, in his opinion, destroys community. It destroys bonds of family and friendship. It destroys the mystical tie we have with nature, because too much knowledge demystifies. It basically instrumentalizes everything into economic materials to be exploited, whether that is the earth in the form of steel and minerals, animals in the form of cattle, or even man himself. Most people today in the valuation of modern society are not much more than economic units. We are exchangeable and interchangeable without inherent value. The value we have is our productivity. And consequently, it's not strange that, considering that that is the only valuation we get, depression and obesity are leading causes of death in Western industrial society. Now, these are critiques, of course, you would hear from reactionaries as much as you would hear from Kaczynski, the destruction of the family and so on. You might as well be hearing a Christian conservative talking. Kaczynski argues against conservatives, however, that they are hypocrites because they embrace technology. My counterpoint to Kaczynski in these things would be that he is having too abstract a view on one level, and at the same time he is looking at it too individualist, too much as an individual. He spent a lot of his life hidden away in a cabin, and while he has contempt for over-socialized individuals, he also has no collective perspective of a society or as groups. So firstly, to say is life is competition. If you have natural selection, then you have predator and prey, you have winner and you have loser. If you have an organized group, such as a nation state, who abandons technology, they will be at the mercy of any other group that does not. There are groups who have no technology, like the Amish and the Hutterites, but they can only live this lifestyle within the context of the United States, whose army protects them and enables their uncompetitive practices. Had they been a state unto themselves, they would either be a backwater that is ignored, or had they perhaps been on some valuable land with a lot of natural resources like petrol or oil or something, then they would simply be under the boot of someone else. Sovereignty and self-actualization ultimately rely on power, on strength, might. For example, European nations dominated the globe for at least 2 centuries due to a massive technological advantage that we had developed. And the African tribes, which were not very technologically developed, who were in touch with nature, who were living in Eden, really, well, they didn't fare very well against machine guns and steamboats. And even to this day, the USA still maintains its position as the global hegemon, not through an obvious technological advantage in the sense of mechanical technology, but they do use ideological technology, thinking, through finance, international finance capitalism. Sometimes, where necessary, the boot of the US soldier still comes down, but most of it is ideological control, propaganda, finance, these sorts of things. So, technology is power, life is competition, and if you want to survive, if you want to thrive, you need to have power. You cannot abandon technology if you want your group to thrive. If you have more than any ambitions as an individual to be farming somewhere with a nice little family far away from all the concerns of advanced and organized politics, well, then you cannot abandon technology. That's one. Now, if we were to accept the premise that deindustrialization is a good thing, then you have the problem of the tragedy of the commons. How would you incentivize everyone on Earth to abandon technology? If all parties succeed, then perhaps we all benefit from deindustrialization and we go back to a happier, closer state of man. Or the very Rousseauian idea, really. Evil was introduced by the idea of property and technology. Anyway, if any one single party does not live by these terms, scrolls away some technology, waits for the rest to deindustrialize, it will rapidly be able to outcompete them and conquer them. The nuclear arms race worked pretty much due to these same principles. No one was willing to back down because the first one to back down would be the loser in the race and would give the other a massive advantage. This is the very same way of thinking. Kaczynski, therefore, in my opinion, looks far too much at the individual and the individual's concerns, and he does not consider how well the individual would fare if, for example, a conquering Chinese regime would be imposed upon him because his society had abandoned technology to defend themselves. And then the Chinese, who still use technology, would simply impose the use of technology on him anyway. And more importantly, really, I reject the premise that technology is inherently bad in itself. I do see the negative effects of technology on humanity, individually and societally. I do see the unhappiness it causes, the disenfranchisement, the inability to be autonomous and self-thinking. But I reject the idea that there cannot be reform in this. My philosophy leans strongly on archaeofuturism and neo-reactionary and NRX ideas, whatever name you want to give it. And these ideas that you unite that which worked from the past with modern technology and ideas. And one of the things is that we have abandoned things from the past and only embraced the modern. I'd go far enough to say that we need to take an abstract view and say that any tools that enable us to improve our fitness, to have more babies, to conquer more territories, such as conquering other planets, is an evolutionary good, and you cannot go against the principles of evolution. Now, technology itself is a product of the human spirit. We made technology. Some can cope better with the results and byproducts of it, some cannot cope with it at all, and some thrive in it. There are simply always winners and losers from any development, societal, evolutionary. If you accept nature, there are winners and losers, prey and predator. We should, and in reality, really, we are able to control the products of our minds and our hands. Technology is not some runaway beast that we have created and lost control of. At least not until we develop an AI that is superior to us. But our problem with technology is a problem of philosophy, a problem of guidance. Our problem with technology stems from the dominant philosophy of our society. The problem is not that there is technology, because technology is just our creation. The problem is, how do we deal with the effects of it? How do we run it? The problem is that neoliberalism exists and Marxism exists. Neoliberalism is a way of thinking that quite deliberately dehumanizes and instrumentalizes everything. Many of the problems of technology that we see today are more a result of policy than properties inherent to technology. People feel alienated because they work in unnatural office environments. They work very long hours, they do abstract work with no visible physical result. At the same time, religious community, family have been deliberately dismantled as a matter of policy because these are barriers to the financialization of everyday life and to state control. If religious institutions provide welfare, if you have solidarity, then this is an obstruction to state welfare. And state welfare is a method of control because you basically provide a subsidy, especially in a democratic mass society, you provide a subsidy to people they will vote for the person who offers them the most money. If you have mutual aid, this is also a barrier to ladening people with debt. This is a problem for financial debt markets, and we live in a debt-based economy. The current paradigm is basically that we derive meaning from consumption and we do not derive meaning from faith or family. Again, these are similar things to what you could hear a Christian conservative say. Then there's, of course, also Marxism, Marxist egalitarianism. And Marxist egalitarianism is a rejection of the harshness of nature. It is unwilling to accept that there are losers, and it is even at some point denying that there is competition in nature itself. I'll give you an example. Lysenko was a leading Soviet agrarian in the 1930s, and he developed a theory of class solidarity among plants, that plants have no predator or prey, and there is no competition between plants because they are all of the same class in a sense, which isn't true. Plants compete against each other for sunlight and mineral resources and water, and that's one of the reasons you see, for example, a height competition among plants. The taller the plant, the more sunlight it can get, and it can outcompete others and put them in the shade. At the root of Marxism is denial of nature. Egalitarianism, which is a sprouts from Marxism, is the leading philosophy of media castes, and it does underlie the Weltanschauung of very many people today. But neoliberalism is more the philosophy of the elites, and Marxism is sort of for the masses. The egalitarianist philosophy is there as a soothing talking point to reassure the population that surely we are not being as cutthroat as all that. No, neoliberalism, no, we're fighting against that, we're not letting them rule. But really it's just a soothing mechanism, it's just talk. Neoliberalism sets the actual agenda. It's the philosophy of the elites. They've sort of found a laissez-faire status quo between them, where one controls societal discourse, the other controls willpower in the economy. Now the problem of technology then, in my view, is a problem of who is at the helm of technological development. What ideas lead society? Now, some effects of technology genuinely are inevitably going to occur and are possible problems to humanity. Some things like automatization will continue to make lower IQ people superfluous. The question is that a bad thing? Now, if you extrapolate that, then technology could make humanity itself obsolete by simply becoming a better, more intelligent, more capable than man. But that's a matter for another video. In the context of humanity, in social technology, there's not really a reason to deconstruct traditions or religions. If anything, it is societally counterproductive because it makes, from very many people, it depresses them and denies them meaning and context. It removes their metaphysical, spiritual view of life, and it removes their teleological purpose. Because one thing society today does not do is provide a teleological framing for people to live by. Things just kind of happen, and there is not very much a purpose. There's just mechanical movement, and nothing has a purpose, and so on. The point is, in my opinion, though, we can decide what ways technology develops, how society is impacted by technology to an extent, because there is always the external limits, and the external limit in the case of technological development is simply the competition of other groups. If you have another group that is outcompeting you technologically, then if it becomes too much of a distance between them, then it becomes a danger to your continued survival. Therefore, there is an external limit to how much you can limit and control and shape technological development, and that is simply your own need for survival and to take part in the competition between groups. But you can steer quite a lot, especially when it comes to societal things. Like, in a sense, you could say the USA has tried to find a leading edge in competition by focusing on financial and economic technologies, which is, when I'm talking about economic technologies, this is not technology in the mechanical sense, but things like Taylorism, managerial philosophies, things like libertarianism. The technology ideas and technology are similar, and technology isn't just mechanical technology. And they've kind of done that at the expense of the rest of the cohesion of society. Whereas, for example, China, which is in competition with the US, has not focused on that, has not let finance dismantle family and religious, well, in the case of China it's not formally religious, but it behaves like religion in many ways. They've not let financial systems dismantle these institutions in order to lay down everything with debt. Now, bad ideas in the end run up against a barrier and are destroyed, but they can continue to exist for quite a while, and in the end I think debt-based economics will prove to be a bad idea, but for the time being it gives a temporary edge, just as much as that you can, you could, if you want to, for example, speed very much with your car, you could do things to alter your car to make it go faster, but which will impact the how long your car will last. It will damage the engine faster, these sorts of things. That's sort of how I see debt economics. So the thing is, though, there is no such thing as free markets and unguided development. Markets are bound by regulation. Man is bound by nature. Things are guided. Things are limited. So technology is not some runaway beast. Everything we make can be steered. If technology is a mechanical bull, then we simply have to make stronger reins. Now, for leftists, Kaczynski had contempt for leftists and ecologists of his time. He called them over-socialized, in the sense that basically what he would argue was that leftists join movements not because they have genuine concerns of the movement, but because they have pathologies and they react to social stimulus. So if the society signals that being concerned for the environment is a good thing, then you join an ecological movement because that's a good thing to do. It's basically the concept of virtue signaling in a way. You take actions not because you genuinely believe things or want to change things, but simply because you desire the social approval. That's one thing. Another thing, he says that leftists have a pathology, an obsession with weakness. They are not weak themselves, because very frequently leftists come from good environments, good backgrounds, but they have an obsession with victimization. They have a pathological problem with strength and success. They despise it and they think it's basically immoral, and therefore they obsess with the fate of minorities, sexual minorities, the environment, things that are completely that are no concern of theirs really, and that they don't really want to solve. They simply want to be involved with this social group thing. And the real thing is that there's no abstract thinking behind it, there's only social pressure. And that applies to very, very many people in the media today. To politicians, people in NGOs. But that's not really people, they have no real power. It's the neoliberal elites that really set policy, and they are far more cutthroat. They are willing to dehumanize and instrumentalize people. And maybe you have to be in order to rule a world of billions. And that's where I come again against the individualism of Kaczynski. I'd put Linkola's perspectives. So Linkola has, he poses the question, what is everything for? What is the value of a single human life? What does having 500 million more people on Earth add to humanity? Do these people add as much as a single Isaac Newton does, or a Michelangelo, or any great painter or thinker? Individuals are not equal in value just because they are people. Someone who adds something to the greatness of arts or the greatness of science is far more valuable than a mass of people who are basically just productive units. In this way, it is sort of a neoliberal perspective, genuinely, because you dehumanize those who are not capable of competing sufficiently. At the same time, that is a good question to ask, because why would you just let things rampantly grow without any sort of asking for what the purpose is? Why would you just let people be born? If you want to mitigate human suffering, if you want to not, in the end, destroy the planet and have a lot of people suffer in economic and in famines and so on, and then why not have them not be born in the first place? If they are not born, they cannot suffer. And in the end, if you want to maintain the environment, and that's one thing that modern environmentalists hardly ever talk about, less people means less consumption. To reduce the stress upon nature, you need to have humans put less stress on it. And the less humans is simply the simplest way to do that. And this also applies to many other things. Less people means less urbanization, less over-socialization results, for example, from having no time away for yourself and no time with nature. Over-socialized, urbanized people are well, that's the result of overpopulation, really. So in this way, Linkola is very much the opposite of Kaczynski with his concern for the individual and individual happiness. And despite my earlier assertion that the primary measure of measuring the effectiveness of policies and so on is to be measured in babies, that doesn't mean you can't have quality control of those babies, right? Even if you want in principle, you want humanity to grow and thrive, and you need people to have humanity. That doesn't mean you should be uncritical in whom fathers the children and so on. I'll give you an example of how life really works. Is the basic principle of life is the cancer cell. The cancer cell grows and grows and grows and hijacks other cells, and it keeps going until it runs up to a natural barrier. In the case of cancer, that is simply the death of the host. Now, quite a lot of nature has evolved to self-contain this eternal growth principle through predator and prey relations and through famine. When this relation becomes unbalanced, overpopulation occurs, as it has with humans, and Linkola asserts this very much. We have exceeded the natural carrying capacity of the planet, and only technology is enabling us to expand beyond this. Otherwise, famine would contain us, because we have thrown off the constraint of predators. We have long ago cast off everything capable of preying on us, except disease. And disease we have severely limited in how it can affect us. We don't have leprosy anymore, for example. Measles and Black Plague have been turned from deadly pandemics into childhood inconveniences through vaccination. And saber-toothed tigers and cave bears, we've extinguished them with stone-tipped spears and torches thousands of years ago. So our only real natural limitation is famine. And to avoid that we run up against that, some selection is good, and technology can prolong what is the carrying capacity, and therefore technology is not necessarily bad. Basically, you have two roads you can go: less people, more technology. I'd say, why would we have to choose either? We can do both. To get back to Linkola, his question is basically, why do we not have quality control? Why do we let these things go so uncontrolled? Why do we have rampant population growth while no one is asking the purpose as to why? And the reason is simply neoliberalism. Neoliberalism wants more people because more people, in a very basic, to very basically put it, more people means growth, means more money, means more profit. And this is the case with very many things. Neoliberals always act as if things just happen because, oh, free market, oh, that's just, you can't control systems are too complex to affect by a matter of policy. Yet at the same time, for example, they'll print trillions and trillions of fiat money to control markets. And that's again an ideological question. A lot of the problems that are inherent to these sorts of things that Kaczynski and Lincoln assert are not a matter of the properties of technology, the properties of man. It's policy. It's policy to just let things run rampant without controls. So, an analogy Lincoln uses, which I like, is if you have a ship that's sinking and you have only so many lifeboats, and not everyone can fit on the lifeboats. If you let everyone get aboard the lifeboats will sink. So if you really love life and are not concerned so much with the individual, but you want the continuation of life itself, anima, then you grab a hatchet and you cut those off that are not, you cut off the excess fat, you trim the fat, and you make sure that some can survive. And to that I would add, we need quality control. You need to be selective in who you let on the lifeboats and who you throw overboard. You can't just chop around you randomly. Because what if, to give it a very simple analogy, what if you end up with only men aboard the lifeboats? Then without women the species is doomed anyway. That's a very simplistic analysis, but you could also simply look at what kind of people do we allow aboard based on IQ, abilities and skills and so on. And if you don't do this, well, to reject eugenics is to implicitly embrace dysgenics, because again, there is no status quo in life. There is no zero line. If you say we're not doing eugenics, it doesn't mean we'll just continue at the permanence of what we are now. No, there will be other impulses. There will be there will always be selective pressures. There will always be selection, and it will be in a dysgenic trend if you do not control it, as it is today. Another problem I have with both Kaczynski and Lincoln is that basically they have no teleological premise to their works. Kaczynski says we have to reject technology because mankind would be happier that way. And then my question is, but what's the inherent value of happiness? What's the purpose of being happy? What if I can be happy? What if we can have higher IQ people be happier and lower IQ people be unhappy? But by that we make humanity better as a whole. Is the unhappiness of one group not worth it? I mean, is that not a sacrifice that is worth it? And if you provide no theological purpose, no ontology as to the why of anything, if you do not set a goal or a purpose, then I'd say, well, what value is happiness in and of itself, really? And the same with, well, Lincoln also does not provide a teleology. He's more concerned with simply the maintenance of life. I guess perhaps Lincoln does have a teleology in the sense that the purpose of life is to continue itself, and anything that endangers the continuation of life is a bad thing, and therefore policies that threaten the continuation of life are a bad thing. And there I would agree, actually. That's an important point to keep in mind. My answer is, of course, that the teleology of the conscious being is to find the mysteries at the core of the universe to attain ultimate knowledge, and to do that we need to optimize ourselves as humans, and that perhaps even exceed what it is to be human. All of this is matters of philosophy, of Weltanschauung, and the neoliberal view, the idea that there's no controls, is basically just informed by greed and short-sightedness, and that might well lead us to extinction. Maybe not the extinction of life. I doubt that if humanity destroys itself in some way, that life itself would be extinguished, but complex life and consciousness would be severely set back. there is no guarantee that if human consciousness is extinguished, some other animal would develop consciousness. It's possible, but it's not a guarantee. Of course, if you believe in an infinite number of worlds with an infinite number of possibilities, the probability of a species developing consciousness equals 1. So now some more points against Kaczynski here. Kaczynski says that technology has made ambitions mechanical and has made autonomy impossible. I say that's not really the case. I'd say that ambitions have always been set by societal pressures. Only a very small handful of individuals are capable to have ambitions of their own, inherent to themselves. And as for autonomy, you're always constrained by society. That is not a result of technological society, that is simply society. In any group greater than 1, you have to have other people in consideration. Even if with just 2 people, things you are already limited in your freedom, because you have to take into consideration the desires, opinions and needs of the other person to at least some extent, and you do not have infinite and complete freedom anymore. Again, Kaczynski's philosophy is too individualist. The ambitions must be set higher in a modern society. I would agree that for many people our ability to select ambitions has been limited and constrained, but and of course guided. But again, all society has that, whether you have technology or not. The less assertive and less intelligent will probably lose out. Yes, that is the result of technological society, of automatization. The question of how do you deal with that is, of course, a matter of ideological policy. But I'd say it's not a bad thing to have humanity as a whole go up in IQ. And the only way to do that is that simply the lower IQ lose out and are unable to reproduce in the end. Now, another thing is that every step has winners and losers. There can be no status quo, there can be no stagnation, and a step once taken cannot be retraced. Technology once developed will never truly be lost. Kaczynski offers the examples of the fall of Rome and the Bronze Age collapse. When Rome fell, it didn't revert to the Neolithic. When the Bronze Age collapse happened, it didn't revert to the Neolithic. There was a setback in technological development, but there was no true destruction of technology. Man did not revert to an absolute state of nature. It didn't even revert to Neolithic times. It did not forget how to farm or how to domesticate cattle or how to irrigate. It forgot some things about how to build more complex buildings. But these temporary losses of technology, there are setbacks. There is no such way as to completely and halt technological development. It will not happen. To give an example in the form of the ideas, when something has been destroyed, it cannot be glued together. Christianity is now a broken vase. It cannot be remade. We can only take those elements of it that were beautiful and true and use them in recreating a new vase. Things dead cannot be revived. I'd say the ambitions we have now have to be set higher. We have to discover new scientific principles, new particles to fight new stars. You could be the first man on Mars. You could be one of the men that restores order, who maintains order, who develops the concepts of natural law. There are many worthy ambitions still to have that are higher than those set by society. And still, to be a policeman, to be a doctor, to be an electrician, to be a farmer, these are all ambitions set by the needs of society. That's true, and what do you want to do about it? Again, in any group greater than 1, your ambitions, your processes are controlled by society as such. To basically summarize, the problem is not technology, the problem is bad ideas, bad philosophy, short-sightedness, weakness, conformity, selfishness. Nothing we create is outside of nature, because we are nature become sentient, as Jonathan Bowden said it. The universe and nature have inconvertible laws. There is order to the universe. Going against them is self-destructive. To try and go against evolution by maintaining nature in stasis is impossible, self-destructive. To try and destroy steps once made, again impossible. You could at most slow things down temporarily. There is constant motion, and you cannot alter that.